What if I tell you that a single drug can treat over 40 different types of cancer and make 30 billion profit in just 1 year? Yep, that's correct. That's the story of Keytruda, a drug called pembrolizumab used to treat different types of cancer, several different types. And this is just the beginning in our dive into 2024's pharmaceutical giants. These drugs matter. They matter beyond their dollar sign. They are shaping people's lives. They are reflecting the global health crisis and the rise in obesity, cancer, and chronic diseases. I came across this graph about most profitable drugs of 2024. And as a pharmacist, I've seen these drugs, I've dispensed these drugs, I've given them to my patient. I counsel the patient on how to take them. I've seen these drugs transform patient lives, but I had no idea how profitable these drugs are to pharmaceutical companies and how expensive they can be. So you will be surprised by what I found. I'm Nadia. I'm a clinical and research pharmacist and host of this podcast. Welcome to episode A Billion Dollar Drug. So what do obesity, HIV, and cancer have in common? They're driving one of the most profitable drugs of 2024. And these drugs are really shaping the healthcare. They're shaping people's lives. And as a pharmacist, I've seen the drugs, I've given them to the patients, but I wasn't really aware how much profit these big pharma companies are making. So from Ozempic and the fact that it became such a huge hit, it's been out for years, but it's never been so profitable. But it's actually its off-label use of weight loss, which was promoted via social media, from TikTok to Instagram to big celebrities talking about them and using them. It's now the second most profitable drug of 2024. Now, let's look at the other game changer drugs and why they're so profitable. And also, let's make some predictions for next year. So, as you can see from the graph here, the oncology drugs, or so-called cancer kings, are still leading the most profitable drugs of 2024 list. Essentially, oncology is still dominating with over 25% of top sales. As you can see, Keytruda, which is pembrolizumab, Opdivo, which is nivolumab, and Darzalex, which is a king in multiple myeloma treatment, are more than 25% of the top sales. So Keytruda, produced by a pharmaceutical company called Merck, is essentially a drug called pembrolizumab, which is a monoclonal antibody, and it has over 40 plus FDA approved indications, which is why profit was 29.5 billion in 2024. It is used for melanoma, head and neck cancer, triple negative breast cancer, and so on and so on. It's one of the leading drugs when it comes to immunotherapy. Now, what is immunotherapy? So both pembrolizumab, which is Keytruda, and nivolumab, which is Opdivo, they're essentially PD-1 inhibitors. They're immunotherapy drugs. So unlike conventional chemotherapy, which was working by being very toxic and attacking the fast dividing cells, immunotherapy instead is kind of helping your immune system fighting the cancer cells. So essentially, they help the immune system attack these cancer cells which were previously hidden. And with conventional chemotherapy, it was so toxic, and because it was killing the rapidly dividing cells, it was causing hair loss, lots of nausea, vomiting, and it would affect the blood counts. It would affect the red blood cells, white cells, hemoglobin. Immunotherapy such as pembrolizumab has a much better tolerability and generally is less toxic. It still has side effects, but not as many as some conventional chemotherapy. It can cause pneumonitis, it can affect your thyroid function, but it's generally less toxic, and it won't cause the hair loss, and it won't affect the blood counts or cause as much nausea and vomiting. Now, one very intelligent thing that Merck, the pharmaceutical company that developed Keytruda, is doing, it's investing investing a lot of money and time in clinical trials. So it's constantly running new and new clinical studies involving humans in order to increase the indication, the number of cancers that pembrolizumab is being used for. Hence, is getting more and more approvals. What does this mean? This basically means that pembrolizumab is increasing the number of cancers that it's being approved for. So it's used for more and more cancers, which means for higher number of people that are using it, so bigger population is having it, which is why its profit has been increasing, and which is why it's the number one on the world's most profitable drugs of 2024. Another aspect that we need to take in consideration is the fact that pembrolizumab and Keytruda has a patent. It is patent protected until 2028. What does this mean? What is this patent? So basically, if a drug comes to the market, and in case of pembrolizumab, it's an amazing immunotherapy, treats cancer, can be given to many patients. Because of its better tolerability, patients are more likely to stay on it for a longer time. So you can see them for months and years on this treatment, unlike conventional chemotherapy. So it's an amazing drug used for many indications, but it's patent protected. So it means other companies cannot copy it. There cannot be copycat drugs. What happens often in these pharma companies, if a drug comes out to the market and it's a very useful, interesting drug, there'll be biosimilar, which will soon arrive to the market. Essentially, biosimilar are like these copycat drugs. They're same in efficacy and safety and do the exact same thing as the original patent drug. But because there's so many of them now, the patent drug, its value kind of decreases, hence it becomes less profitable because the price has to drop because there's so many biosimilars. And this is exactly what's happened with AbbVie and Humira. As you can see here, Humira has dropped on 10, so it's the least profitable out of this top 10 giants, although Humira, which is essentially a drug used to treat like chronic conditions such as Crohn's disease, it's used to treat different types of psoriasis, arthritis, and these drugs, Humira, has been a world's top leading, most profitable drug for 10 years between 2012 and 2022. It was the number one, the king of drugs out there. But because of so many biosimilars that have been invented once it lost the patent, now it's dropping to 10. And I think my prediction is that next year it's probably not even going to be in the top 10 most profitable drugs. This is not because people are not going to be having Crohn's disease or psoriasis. This is just because there'll be other biosimilar drugs, which means that that original patented drug, its value is going to decrease and it's going to become less profitable. So pembrolizumab, I think Keytruda is probably going to be the leading number one drugs for a couple of more years, unless the anti-obesity drugs actually take over, or until it loses its patent in 2028. Now, what do you think? Do you think that cancer drugs are going to stay at the top of the list and be most profitable drugs of 2025? Let me know. Drop the comment. Now, let's look at the drug that I like to call the metabolic boom drugs. Yes, that's right. So Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy. It seems like everyone's been talking about that. They've been the shining star in the spotlight of 2024. And that's not just only on your TikTok homepage, it's actually when it comes to pharma companies. So as you can see, GLP-1 agonists such as semaglutide, which is essentially Ozempic, produced by Novo Nordisk, hit almost 17 billion in profits in 2024. Now, despite this amazing success and the fact that it's been such a spotlight and such a innovation, amazing drug that so many people are using, the fact that it has a cardiovascular protective function, it treats type 2 diabetes and obesity, but it's also been used for weight loss, as we all know, as an off-label use. So despite this huge success and 17 billion profits in 2024, the pharma company who developed it, Novo Nordisk, is actually facing a lot of challenges because of a lot of competition, because of a lot of other pharma companies are developing other weight loss drugs. And also the fact that the demand was so high, the supply chain was actually couldn't meet the demand for the drug. So what Novo Nordisk is trying to do is essentially trying to expand its production to increase the capacity, and it's also developing new treatments, including a oral version of semaglutide and next generation obesity drugs. So actually, oral version of semaglutide does currently exist, but it is not licensed for obesity or weight loss, and it's actually not as effective, not well absorbed as the injection, and it's not as effective. Hence, that's why it's not widely used and popular. Now, as we all know, GLP-1 agonists are used in diabetes, in obesity, and they have cardiovascular risk reduction. And plus, there is this cultural phenomenon and a huge popularity with its off-label use for weight loss. Now, weight loss actually in Ozempic, the whole hype, it actually started on social media, and it just shows you how much social media is part of our life and it's affecting everything, even the big pharma. Do you know people using Ozempic for weight loss? Let me know in comments. Have you seen this, what we call the Ozempic phase? Yes, that's right. The Ozempic phase is this phenomena that people who use Ozempic and lose weight very quickly start to have a phase, which is the Ozempic phase, which is like the aging phase. Essentially, they just seem to look older. Their face looks older. And this is not really a side effect of Ozempic or anything, but it's just what happens when you lose weight very quickly, which is what happens with Ozempic. You get looser skin, hollow cheeks, and more visible wrinkles, which is what make you look older, kinda. And like I said, it's not caused by the drug directly, but it's just losing the fat quickly triggers this kind of aging of your face. What do you think of the Ozempic phase? Now, we have to remember that Ozempic actually comes with a side effects. There's nausea, there's vomiting, there's just people not wanting to eat, loss of appetite, and just makes people sick. It is very, very important, especially for off-label use for weight loss, that you consult with a medical professional and that the whole, treatment is supervised by a healthcare professional. Now, what's happening behind closed doors in pharma industries, and it is something very, very interesting and promising, is the development of new anti-diabetes and anti-obesity drugs. Yes, that's true. So something that's only been tested currently in animals, you can read about it, but that is now undergoing investigation. So there are lots and lots of clinical trials testing this new drug with a lot of potential. The drug is called maridebart cafraglutide, and essentially it's also known as maritide, and this is an experimental weight loss and type 2 diabetes drug currently in development by a pharmaceutical company, and it's part of this new generation of GLP-1 based therapies, but with an enhanced design and a better structure so that hopefully it can be much more effective than Ozempic or Mounjaro. So it will cause more weight loss quicker, and it will also have a more long-lasting effect. Now, how is this possible? Well, essentially, this promising investigational drug is a dual agonist of GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, which we know is essentially like your Ozempic, and it's also, so it has like a different part to it, so like they're attached, and a GCGR, glucagon receptor, meaning it activates both receptors to help regulate blood sugar, reduce appetite, and boost energy expenditure. So these drugs essentially so far in the trials have shown significant weight loss, more than that of Ozempic and Mounjaro, and it's being essentially promoted as this next generation metabolic disease treatment and could reshape the landscape if approved. It's still under the investigation, so it's not yet available. It does not have license, and we don't know exactly how many years it's going to take until it gets there. But if it does get approved and becomes, the trials show that it's successful, it can really have a huge impact on obesity and therefore the health crisis, because we know how, that there's an ongoing global health crisis with obesity. And also it, I think, has a potential to replace Ozempic, which seems like to be a top leading drug of 2024 and definitely 2025. So watch the space for the novel obesity, anti-obesity treatments. I think pharma companies are seeing, they saw what happened with Novo Nordisk's Ozempic, and now they're just investing more and more in developing new drugs that can tackle that. Now let's look at the rest of the drugs in this list. So immunotherapy has for years been a big focus of pharma companies, and you can see Dupixent, which is dupilumab, another monoclonal antibody, made 13 billions in sales in 2024 alone, and Scorizis, which is a brand name for a drug called risankizumab, another monoclonal antibody, has made almost 12 billions in sales, showing the rise in immunology. So essentially, they are treating eczema, Crohn's disease, psoriasis, ulcerative colitis, this kind of immune-related chronic conditions. Now, fun fact, daratumumab is actually tackling CD38, what used to be a forgotten molecule that no one cared about and no one thought it was important, but then actually it became a target, and look, it created a drug which made billions in profit and saved so many lives. So AbbVie, which is Humira, as you can see, is now 10th. So the least out of this top 10 is the least profitable drug, which is still making almost 9 billion profit in sale, which is absolutely amazing. However, when you think about it, for 10 years straight, between 2012 and 2022, Humira was the leader in the world as the most profitable drug. And like I said, because of the biosimilar, it dropped to the 10th place. And I think 2025, it's probably not even going to be here. I don't think it's going to be in the 10 most profitable drugs in 2025, but let me know what you think. Now, next one to discuss, and it's quite important one, it's Biktarvy. Biktarvy, produced by a pharmaceutical company called Gilead, is a antiretroviral, so treatment for HIV infection. Gilead for years have been a leading company which really focuses on changing and shaping how HIV is treated, but not only how it's treated, but how can it be prevented. So it's focusing a lot on developing new treatments to improve patient compliance, improve tolerability, improve how much patients like the treatment for HIV, but also the treatment that can be given as a prophylaxis. So like pre-prophylaxis exposure, if you know you might be exposed to it, you can take a drug so that you don't get HIV at first place. Now, Biktarvy is a brilliant drug, and you can see it made such a huge profit in 2024 because this drug, it's just a tablet which is taken one tablet once a day, is actually combining 3 powerful antiretroviral agents in one, so that instead of having to take, 2, 3, 4, 5 pills a day, you're just taking 1 pill a day, but it combines 3 antiretrovirals in it. That's why these patients are more likely to remember to take it, and the compliance is better because it's just 1 tablet once a day, and also the tolerability is quite good. So Gilead is doing a brilliant in HIV research, and it conducts so many clinical trials with developing new and novel drugs for HIV. Now, how many of you know someone who is taking anticoagulant drug called Eliquis? Eliquis is a brand for apixaban. Apixaban is a blood thinner, what belongs to DOAC, which is direct oral anticoagulation drug. DOACs are essentially incredibly powerful drugs, and they have been created because there was a much need to develop something, because previously, historically, for so many years, the only drug that we relied on was warfarin. Warfarin was the only oral tablet which was a blood thinner. So all the patients who needed an oral blood thinner were put on warfarin. Now, when it comes to warfarin, warfarin is still used to date, and it's quite powerful and interesting drug, but essentially it's life-saving. However, warfarin has a lot of unwanted effects, a lot of drug interactions, a lot of food interactions, and patients who are on warfarin, they need frequent monitoring, they need frequent blood tests to test their international normalized ratio, what we call INR, which will determine the dose. They need loading, they need to have dose changes, and that is actually causing patient not wanting to be on it. Another interesting thing about warfarin is that actually warfarin has one of the wildest origins of how it was discovered. Now, listen to this. It was discovered because cows were bleeding to death in the 1920s. So farmers in North America noticed that even a small cut in a cow would cause cow to bleed to death because they just wouldn't produce a clot. So when you cut yourself, clot is produced, and that prevents you from bleeding to death. These cows in 1920s were just bleeding to death. And it was discovered essentially that it was spoiled sweet clover hay which caused them to bleed so much. Now, scientists traced it to a compound which stopped blood from forming clots, and decades later, that drug became a rat poison. I know, it was a rat poison. And only later did doctors say, actually, this rat poison can save so many lives. And that's how warfarin was developed. And don't take me wrong, it's a brilliant drug. Essentially, warfarin is a vitamin K antagonist. What does that mean? So vitamin K is one of the coagulation factors, but the problem is if you take warfarin and you suddenly decide to change your diet, that can be very, very dangerous, because any food which is rich in vitamin K, such as your greeny leafy vegetables, that can interfere with warfarin. So that's why patients who are on warfarin need to be very careful and not change their diet and suddenly decide to be healthy and eat so many green leafy vegetables, because that can interact with warfarin. So as you can imagine, and some people just didn't want to take it because it used to be a rat poison, and now these DOACs such as apixaban, edoxaban, rivaroxaban, they were discovered, and they don't require as much monitoring. They're less drug interactions, they're less food interactions. You can essentially eat what you want. Now, obviously, alcohol should be avoided. It can still cause bleeding. Apixaban still come with some side effects, but essentially has better tolerability and it's just easier for patients to take than warfarin, which explains why DOAC have been brilliant discovery, and which is why apixaban made over 13 billion in sales in 2024. Yep. Now, to look at the trend and to summarize this picture, we can see that definitely oncology still has a dominance. Whether that's going to continue in 2025, I think it still will. I think that, number of cancer is rising and we still have this amazing treatment. And with pembrolizumab having its patent until 2028, I don't think any biosimilar obviously cannot be made. So I think pembrolizumab is likely to be a most profitable drug of 2025 as well. Now, I do think that, the impact on the metabolic drug surge, so the drugs that are used for weight loss, for obesity, for type 2 diabetes, they are on surge. The demand is so high. People want to take them. People are aware that they want to be healthy, they want to be in good shape. So number of people taking them has increased. So I personally think, if not in 2025, definitely around 2028, 2029, we are going to see probably some novel anti-diabetic drug being a top of the list. It's probably going to overcome the oncology treatments such as pembrolizumab. But you never know, they're new discoveries, and previously, like warfarin, drugs were discovered completely by accident. I mean, by bleeding cows. Now, with the developed technology, we can, test for different genes. We can use AI. We're using so much new technology to really see what's causing the diseases, which is then enabling us to come up with this new treatment. Like, for example, who would think of a CD38 molecule being a target for a drug which brought billions in sales? I also think that, the fact that these drugs are so expensive, I mean, are these profits helping or hurting healthcare? I also think this has to be an ethical side to it, that these drugs, they're life-changing, can save life, and they really need to be available to whoever needs them in the entire world. I think we really need to try and increase access, make them more accessible, make them more available to people around the world who really need them. Let me know what you think are going to be a most profitable drugs of 2025. Have you been surprised by anything in this, what we talked about? And let me know if there's any particular drug here that you want me to talk about more. Drop comments. I release episodes every Tuesday, so hope to see you next week. Bye. Thanks for watching.